This will be good training!
Chapter 9! Enter Sasori!
Now you're with Kakashi, hmm? This isn't going... What to do?
Mangekyo Sharingan!
What's that?
Visual Jutsu! No! Naruto, now's your chance to strike!
My arm sucked into oblivion by this wretched jutsu.
Rasengan!
All right.
Gaara! Wake up!
I never thought I'd meet anyone with visual jutsu as powerful as Itachi's. This Jinchuriki is nothing. The problem is how to deal with Kakashi.
You're going down for this!
Maybe someday I'll give you a rematch, kid.
You've let down your guard.
What? Is that the Jinchuriki's power?
I'll never forgive you! You're dead!
Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! You can't escape! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! You can't escape! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! You can't escape! Hidden Lotus! Hidden Lotus! You can't escape! Hidden Lotus! Is an explosion! Hidden Lotus! You can't escape! You can't escape! Dynamic entry! Is an explosion! Dynamic entry!
Yes, I did it. Lady Chio. Sakura, you've been poisoned. I'll be fine. Hang on. I'll use my reanimation ninjutsu. It's okay. I had a feeling this might happen, so I brought this. It's the antidote you made. Didn't mean to worry you. I'll be fine with this. You're quite a girl.
An amazing young lady indeed. It never occurred to me you'd have an antidote. It's embarrassing, really.
You be quiet, Sasori! No. What's wrong? Lady Chio! Ah!
How long does it take to finish off one little girl in an old bag? I never imagined I'd have to resort.
Of course. He turned himself into a human puppet.
Secret red move. Performance of 100 puppets. It's showtime.
Fine. I'll take whatever you throw at me. That's enough, Sakura! You fought more than enough! It's not in me to give up! Quitting's not an option! How silly of me! You've inherited Tsunade's strong will. This is my last antidote, Lady Chio. Please keep it. This is the grand finale, Sakura. Are you ready? Yes.
Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Down! Down! Down to shred you! Time to shred you! I'll cut you up! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Leave whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Time to shred you! Time to shred you! I'll cut you up! Time to shred you! I'll cut you up! Dynamic entry! Leave whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! No! Dynamic entry! I'll cut you up. I'll cut you up. I'll cut you up. Time to shrink. I'll cut you up. I'll cut you up. Dynamic entry! I'll cut you up. Whirlwind! Leave whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Time to shrink. Time to shrink. Hidden Lotus!
This will be good training!
Chapter 9!
You can't escape! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! You can't escape! You can't escape! Leave whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Leave whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Here! You can't escape! You can't escape! Here! You can't escape! Here! You can't escape! The next one's fast! Here! This is bad. This is bad. Here! Dynamic entry! Here! You can't escape! You can't escape! Here! This is bad. You can't escape! can't escape! You can't escape! Art is an explosion! You can't escape! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! This is bad. Dynamic entry! You can't escape! Here! You can't escape! Here! This is bad. You can't escape! You can't escape! Dynamic entry! This is bad. This is dynamic entry! You can't escape! Here! This is bad. Here! This is bad. This is bad. This is bad. You can't escape. You can't escape. The next one's fast. You can't escape. Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Here! You can't escape! Performance of
「
to shred you. I'll cut you up. I'll cut you up. Time to shred you. Time to shred you.
Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic
I'll cut you up. Time to shred you. I'll cut you up.
Dynamic
I'll cut you up. Performance of 100%.
Whirlwind!
This will be good training!
Chapter 9! Enter Sasori!
You can't escape!
Dynamic entry!
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 You can't
Dynamic
escape!
entry!
You can't escape!
Leap whirlwind!
This is bad.
Dynamic entry! Leap whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry!
You can't escape!
Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Here!
You can't escape! You can't escape! This is bad.
Here!
This is bad.
Here!
One's fast.
Dynamic entry!
You can't escape! This is bad. This is bad.
Here!
This is bad. You can't escape! The next one's fast. You can't escape! This is bad. You can't escape! This is bad. This is bad. This is bad. You can't escape. Leave whirlwind! This is bad. You can't escape. The next one's fast. You can't escape. Dynamic entry! This is bad. Performance of 100%. Here! Dynamic entry! I'll cut you up! I'll cut you up! Time to shoot out! Time to shoot! Time to shoot! I'll cut you up! Time to shred you! Time to shred you! I'll cut you up! Time to shred you! Time to shred you! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Leave whirlwind! Leave whirlwind! Leave whirlwind! That's insane! Time to shred you! Leave whirlwind! That's insane! Time to shred you! Time to shred you! Leave whirlwind! No! Time to shred you! I'll cut you out! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! That's insane! Time to shred you! Leave whirlwind! Leave whirlwind! Down! you up! Time to shred you!
Leave Whirlwind! Leave Whirlwind! That's insane!
I'll cut you up! Time to shred you! I'll cut you up! Time to shred you! Burn! Time to
Leave
shred you!
Whirlwind! That's insane! Leave Whirlwind! Dynamic entry!
Time to shred you! Time to shred you! I'll cut you up! Burn! Time to shred you! I'll cut you up! Time to shred
Leave
you!
Whirlwind! Leave Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Leave Whirlwind! That's insane!
Time to shred you! Time to shred you! Burn! I'll cut you up!
Here!
I'll cut you up!
Here! Dynamic entry!
I'll cut you
Dynamic
up!
entry! Whirlwind! That's insane! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Leave Whirlwind! That's insane! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! That's insane! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! That's insane!
Time to shred you!
Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! That's insane! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Leave Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Leave Whirlwind! Insane! Performance of 100 puppets!
I'll cut you up!
Dynamic entry!
Time to shred you! I'll cut you up! I'll cut you up! Time to shred you! I'll cut you up! I'll cut you up!
Leave Whirlwind! Leave Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Leave Whirlwind! Leave Whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Leave Whirlwind! Leave Whirlwind! That's insane!
I have to admit this kid's got talent. My performance of 100 puppets has brought down an entire nation. I never imagined one person could beat it. There's no point in wasting more puppets now. I haven't done this since I first joined the Akatsuki. It's been a long time since I've had to use myself.
What a nightmare of a grandson you've turned into.
I have no interest in listening to an old hag's lectures. Do me a favor and save your babbling for the afterlife.
Sakura! Lady Chiyo! Sakura, you've got to beat Sasori. Don't worry about me.
I will, Lady Chiyo, but please, use the antidote.
Don't drop your guard, little girl. You're next.
Go get him, Sakura! Stop that foolish grandson of mine!
All right!
Dynamic entry! Whirlwind! Leaf whirlwind! Dynamic entry! Down! Dynamic entry! Down! Dynamic entry! Down! Burn! I'll crush you! I'll crush you! I'll crush you! I'll crush you! Burn! Burn! I'll crush you! Leave whirlwind! Dynamic! 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 I'll cut you up! I'll crush you up. Time to shred you. I'll crush you. I'll crush you. Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! I'll crush you! Dynamic entry! 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 I'll crush you! 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 Dynamic entry! 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 I'll cut you up! I'll crush you! I'll cut you up! I'll crush you! Dynamic entry! Dynamic entry! Dynamic Time to shred you! Dynamic entry! 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 I'll crush you! I'll cut you up! Time to shred you! I'll crush you! I'll crush you!
I'm sorry it has to end like this, Sasori. Now that I think about it, you're also a victim of the Great Ninja War.
Lady Chio, please! The antidote!
How about some granny and girl on...
Run, Sakura! Sakura! You protected me!
Why did you...
You can't move at all now, can you? Even with all your fancy puppets, a part of you has to be human to control chakra. And that's your only weakness. It's hidden in your chest. That piece was the source of your chakra. Sakura!
That's no use. There's far too much damage. Even without the effects of the poison, she's beyond healing.
But what I'm doing to the girl now isn't medical ninjutsu. It's a reanimation jutsu. I'm harnessing my own life force and conducting... It's my own jutsu. I created it in hopes of saving your heart, wounded by the...
Lady Chio...
With this jutsu, life can be breathed into anyone, even puppets. But in exchange, the caster must give up her own life.
Nonsense.
Sakura, are you all right?
That can't be. I thought you said you'd die after bringing her back to life.
But you see, Sakura wasn't dead, so I survived.
That's a shame.
Sasori!
Little girl, I'm going to do something pointless too. Think of it as a reward for defeating me. You wanted to know about Orochimaru, didn't you? Go to the Tenchi Bridge in the village hidden in the grass. 10 days from now at noon.
Why? What's there?
One of Orochimaru's henchmen is working for me as a spy. That's where I'm supposed to rendezvous with him. However, I don't think I'll make it.
Oh, I'll see you soon, Sasori. There's still something I must do here.